Welcome to Off the Wall. My name is Trey. Thank you so much for joining me today. What a great weekend of arena and indoor football we had this past weekend. In the AFL, we had ArenaBowl XXXIII take place between the Albany Firebirds and the Billings Outlaws. So we'll dive into that game, some of the great stuff that happened on the field, some of the great stuff that happened off the field as well, and what we can look forward to in the offseason as the AFL tries to retool and regroup for 2025. Then we'll also dive into the IFL. The IFL had week 19, which is their last week of the regular season. So 8 teams had their season wrap up this past weekend, but that means the playoffs are right around the corner this upcoming weekend. So we'll talk about IFL week 19, some of the games that went down, some of the playoff implications that were a part of the week, and who's in the playoffs, what the matchups look like, and what we can look forward to this upcoming weekend. But before we dive into any of that, it's social time. That's right, folks. If you can give us a follow at Off the Wall FB, F as in foot, B as in ball, Off the Wall FB. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter /X, and we're on TikTok, posting all sorts of stuff on there. Had a great time during the Arena Bowl, connecting with folks who were new to the arena football game and discovering arena football for the very first time, and having a chance to chop it up with them was really fun. And being able to post some predictions for some of the games and be able to post some highlights of some players that I think are really doing a really great job. So I'm posting all sorts of stuff on there. So give us a follow if you're not on Red already. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rate the show on the podcast page. Raise 5 stars. It'll really help us get it into more people's ear holes. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already. We've been building up some subscribers and really excited to see some of the momentum that we're gaining across the board. And drop a comment. Let me know what you thought of the Arena Bowl. If you watched it, did you love it? Did you hate it? Who did you think was going to win? Were you surprised by anything? Let's talk ball. Let's talk about the AFL in the comments here. But yeah, without further ado, let's dive right into the AFL. So Arena Bowl XXXIII. First things first, this was a great game and probably the best possible scenario that the AFL could have hoped for, given everything that they've gone through as a league, individually as teams, all throughout the entire year. The AFL season was only 10 weeks long, with 2 or 3 weeks for playoffs. So that's only 13 weeks, but it felt like an eternity. Thinking back on some of the stuff that happened in the preseason and in week 1, it feels like it was years ago, but in reality, it was only 3.5 months ago, if that, 3 months ago. So it was crazy to kind of think back and think back through some of the trials and tribulations that this league went through, starting with 16 teams, eventually going down to 8, 6 teams making the playoffs, and ultimately the best 2 teams in the league from the beginning of the year all the way to the end made it to the Arena Bowl, in the Albany Firebirds and the Billings Outlaws. And it was just a great game. And like I said, the best possible game that they could have gotten on CBS Sports on a national network. So this was a best case scenario for the AFL, and really hyped to see some of the positives that they were able to take away from this game. Now, if you didn't watch the game, this game took place at the American Dream Mall in East Rutherford, New Jersey. Now, I know what you're thinking. We all thought the same thing. This game's being played in a mall? What? Wait, what is that? But let's take a step back. This specific mall, this American Dream Mall, is the second largest mall in the country, only to Mall of America in Minneapolis. And it's not like the mall that is like in your downtown of whatever city you live in. That's just some mall with an old Best Buy, a building that used to be a Sears, and a couple local clothing brands occupying the mall space. That's not what this mall was. This mall is they refer to themselves as like a retail and entertainment complex. There's a theme park. They have concerts. They've had hockey games there. I think the Harlem Globetrotters are doing a residency there soon. They have attractions, all sorts of stuff going on. So it's more than just your local mall. And I think initially, I'm guilty of this, when we saw that it was going to be played at this mall, I was like, oh, come on. You're making it hard to defend the league here. Like, I'm doing my best to be a supporter, but after seeing the game being broadcast, I'm a fan of how they did it, and the Coliseum style viewing experience that it provided for folks. So There's a couple reasons why I like it. First is the way they organized the seating. You were right up on the action, no matter where you were, whether you were on the floor right next to the walls, you were on the second or third level. If you've ever been to a mall with multiple stories, you know, like there's usually like a big open area where you can kind of lean on the railings a little bit. And that's what this was. Like it was a big open space. It had some really great natural lighting, which was odd to see in in arena football. The overall presentation was a lot better than I thought it would be. And so going into it, I had my hesitations. I was like, this is going to be weird, but I'm going in with an open mind. But it was pretty cool. And I don't know if it was the presentation itself or just the game being a really good game on top of it, despite it, I'm not sure, but I felt like this game portrayed the league pretty well, given everything that happened. The presentation with CBS Sports got off to a little bit of a rocky start, but I think they found their groove, and it was pretty cool. Another reason why I like this is because the AFL has struggled with attendance. Let's just be honest with ourselves. You look at any AFL game outside of maybe Albany and Billings, um, attendance was not great. Not great anywhere. Even Albany and Billings for certain games, I'm sure they wish the attendance could have been a little bit higher. But some of the off the field shenanigans that happened with this league and some of these teams really, really killed the attendance that they were able to draw. So I think that's a positive of having this game played in the venue that they had it in, was that they were able to minimize the amount of seats. Let's just be honest. If they played this game in a neutral site arena, they probably have maybe 1,000 people in attendance, 2,000 people in attendance in a 8,000 person arena. It's gonna look empty. And so the way that they did it with this game, you kind of minimize um, well, let's just be real. You minimize what the internet can possibly clown you on with the attendance by shifting it over to this unique venue, and it just kind of gets you thinking, like, all right, what other venues can they potentially play in the future? Where else can they possibly play? It kind of felt like NFL Street a little bit, where football in a place that there's not usually football, and it was just unique. I'm not going to tangent on it too much, but there was lots of positive attention on social media as well. Sports Center, CBS Sports, ESPN, all of these big name sports media companies were drawing attention to the fact that this game, this championship game, was being played in a mall, and it was a novelty act. It was a novelty venue, but let's just call it for what it is. Arena football is a novelty sport. So leaning into the novelty aspect of it really worked out well. You look at some of the social media posts that were posted as like covering this game, you're looking at 3 million views on some of these things. You're looking at a couple million views, 100,000 likes, tens of thousands of interactions talking about this league. And that's the type of positive attention that the league needed. Granted, some of the attention may not have been so positive. It was plenty of Auntie Anne's and Wetzel's Pretzels jokes flying around the place. Um, Lots of food court jokes. CBS Sports had a funny reel talking about. I told my wife I was going shopping with her. He's at a candle store, then they pan over and he's watching the football game. Like everyone had their jokes, everyone had their moment, but it was some light, fun attention to a league that desperately needed that positivity based on how things have gone so far this season. So I was a fan of how the game was played out and how the game was presented on CBS Sports in that venue. And I think the league did a really good job, all things considered, and ended the entire season on as positive of a note as they possibly could. Now, for the game itself, last week, if you go back to last week's episode, I predicted that Billings would win 47-41. A lot of people were on Albany heading into the game just because Albany has such a high-powered offense. Billings plays a much more conservative defensive style of football, and they're much more intentional and willing to do some ground and pound and very, very old school AFL play calling. And a lot of people were big fans of the Albany Firebirds heading into this one. Now, I predicted 47-41. Billings wins. And the final score of the game was 46-41. Billings wins. So I'm not going to brag about basically nailing the prediction and the final score. Other people would, but I won't. Other people would take a victory lap and say, I called it. I know ball, off the wall knows ball. That's what some people were saying on social. But again, I'm not saying this. That's not me. That's not who I am. I'm as humble as they come. Was it a good guess? Was it a good prediction? Of course, absolutely. But again, I'm not going to be the one to take a victory lap. I'm not going to be the one to harp on it. I'm not going to be the one to really hang my hat on that all throughout the offseason, heading into the potential next season for the AFL. That's not my style. That's not what I'm going to do. But it was a pretty good prediction. Let's just be honest with ourselves. So these were the two best teams in the AFL all year, and they delivered a fantastic game. Starting with Billings, they had a slow, methodical start by design to the beginning of this game. In the first quarter, they had a single drive that was 11 plays, 8 minutes and 53 seconds, I think it was, which is an eternity in arena football. And some people were not happy about that start. A lot of people were saying it takes away from the intent of the game. We want to see action. We want to see points. But my retort to them is, how do you neutralize a high-powered offense like Albany? Albany wants to get in a shootout. Albany wants to get into a 55-65 game. Albany wants to get into a touchdown, 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 touchdown game. That's not how Billings plays ball. Billings has a defensive-minded head coach, Cedric Walker, who was a defensive specialist in the AFL for years and years with the Arizona Rattlers and then with the Chicago Rush later on in his career. So he is a defensive-minded coach, and they have a tremendous offensive coordinator in Zed Bonner. So they know how to be efficient and impactful and intentional with their play calling. And that's exactly what they did in the first half. They took the wind out of the sails. Albany had the home field advantage. If we're just, it was a neutral site game, but the game was played in East Rutherford, New Jersey. I think it was like a 4-hour bus ride from Albany. Meanwhile, Billings, it was a trek to get from Billings to New Jersey. So this was a home game for Albany for all intents and purposes. So the fact that they were able to start off so intentional and so methodical and really just be as physical as possible, it really set the tone for the game. And Albany had a really hard time getting things going on offense. Um, for Albany in particular, they had a situation with their kicker that was quite unique. Their kicker all year, who was fantastic, Orozco, he hurt his leg at some point. wasn't really clear on what happened, whether it was like in a game or in practice or how it went down. But he was fantastic all year, hitting deuces all throughout the season, and hit a couple game winners for Albany. But he wasn't able to play in this one. So they ended up signing a kicker who, on the broadcast, they said he was a mechanic in Oviedo, Florida. Earlier this week, Albany signed him and flew him up for the championship game. So this guy had never played arena football before, and here he was kicking in the AFL championship, the Arena Bowl on CBS Sports on national television. So what a story for that guy. But that certainly played a part for Billings. After they scored some touchdowns, in situations where they would usually go for the extra point because their kicker was pretty automatic with things, they were chasing the points early in this one. They were going for 4-point conversions, trying to close the gap with Billings early on, and they managed to do that at certain points, but it got to a point where they might have started chasing the points a little bit too early, and that put them in a hole later in the game that they just couldn't overcome. So um, Albany got a little bit unlucky with some of the injuries heading into this game, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Billings absolutely dominated this game, physically dominated. And the ref performance for both sides wasn't great, but specifically in the first half, it felt like the Billings defensive line was getting held almost every play. And heading into halftime, Coach Cedric Walker, he was fired up. He let the CBS team know that he was barking at the refs and saying like, "Hey, my guys are getting held. We should be up by more than 4 at halftime. We should be dominating these guys." And in the second half, they were able to open the floodgates a bit and really open things up. But this was a very impressive game by Billings, and just couldn't be more happy for the Billings community, the Billings fan base. Stephen Titus, the owner, I know he has been through hell and back this season, given everything they went through, and it was a model franchise, a model start for Billings. They embraced the Iron Man mentality and signed some really great two-way players from the get-go. And some of those players were two-way players up until the very end. You're talking about the DJ Harveys, the Hunter Swoboda. Like, they were playing both sides and playing really impactful football on both sides, not just showing up and saying that they did it. It was a great game, and Albany fought back. They tried their best to get back into this one, and they just ran out of time and they ran out of gas toward the end. Now, looking at some of the stats, we'll start with Billings here. So Isaac Harker at quarterback, he went 16 for 27 for 184 yards and 5 touchdowns. He ended up getting the ArenaBowl MVP, but in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of folks that watched that game, throwing 5 touchdowns is great, but when you throw all 5 of those touchdowns to one receiver who is making play after play after play, you got to think, maybe he was the MVP. And Dwayne Brown had himself an unbelievable game. He had 9 catches for 125 yards and 5 touchdowns, including a 37-yard touchdown late in the game that really, really put this game out of reach for Albany and was the cherry on top and ultimately put Billings in the driver's seat through the end of the game and really enabled them to run out the clock and hold on for the victory. But this game was a masterclass. No, maybe not masterclass. It was a junior masterclass in play calling and efficiency by Sed Bonner and this Billings Outlaws offense. And they played great and they executed when they needed to. Hunter Swoboda, he had a really timely touchdown in the second half that put Billings further ahead and at the goal line and really fought to get into the end zone. And I just can't say enough about this Billings team. I saw the vision with them in week 2 and I was like, this team gets it. And I'm glad that they were able to fight all the way to the end, make it to the ArenaBowl, and walk away with their first ArenaBowl championship. But flipping over to Albany here, Jake Medlock, he went 19 for 32, and he had 213 yards and 2 touchdowns as well. He also had an interception. Running the ball, they didn't do a fantastic job. The most impact that they had was with Jake Medlock when he was scrambling, but late in the game, he got roughed up a little bit by the Billings defensive line. That pass rush was getting to him, and they took away his legs because he got tangled up in his knee. He was very evidently hobbling around back there, and he had a very large knee brace on towards the end of the second half, and he just wasn't the same. He just wasn't the same quarterback from that point. But Darius Prince had 9 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown. Darian Townsend had 5 catches for 101 yards and a touchdown. And they did what they could to stay in this game, but they couldn't make those plays when they needed them late. So Albany fought really hard to stay in this one, but they just got outplayed by Billings, and it just felt like Billings was more physical than them at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, and ultimately took it home. So this was a great AFL championship, a great ArenaBowl. Ending the season on such a positive note like this was something that the league needed, and it's a bit of a relief for some of the fans, the longtime fans of the league, after all the BS that we went through early this season with the Hutton regime and this team folding, that team folding, this team folding, that team folding, and there's lots of work to do in the offseason, but I'm cautiously optimistic about this league's future. And if they can retain some of the leadership that they have in place now, I think 2025 could be a special year for the AFL and continue some of this positive momentum. But we'll talk about the future of the AFL a little bit more in depth in future episodes. But congrats again to the Billings Outlaws. This was a well-deserved win. They were the better team on this day, and throughout the entire season, they played great football, and to see them get rewarded for it was really awesome. So congrats to Billings. So that was the AFL in the ArenaBowl. Lots of work to do in the offseason for the future, and we'll be sure to keep everyone up to date on things as they happen over the next couple of months throughout the offseason, leading into what it will hopefully be a 2025 season for the AFL, but only time will tell at this point. But let's shift gears over to the IFL. IFL had week 19 this past weekend, which is the last regular season week of the year for the IFL, and I remember thinking back in like week 4 or 5, I was like, week 19. God, that's so long from now. Like we're never going to get there. There's so much football, and we blink, and before we know it, we're at the end of the season. So, 8 teams played their final game of the year this past weekend, and the other 8 will be advancing to the playoffs starting next week. So we'll dive into the games, talk about some of the highlights, some of the recaps of the teams that are wrapping up their season now, and then we'll dive into a preview of some of those playoff matchups. So the first game we're going to talk about is the Massachusetts Pirates at the Tulsa Oilers, and Tulsa won this game 44-24. So a bit of a surprising result in the eyes of most folks. Massachusetts came into this game as the favorite, but they already had the playoffs clinched, and it became very apparent very early that they weren't gonna be full throttle going 100% in this one. It was a big win for Tulsa, not taken away from Tulsa's win at all, but they ended up pulling Alejandro Benefield pretty early. Some of their main playmakers on offense were not nearly as involved as they had been all year. And if this was a situation where Massachusetts was still clawing for a playoff spot, they probably would have played and probably would have been a little more balls to the wall with things. But ultimately, this game didn't really matter for the Pirates. It really didn't. They were in the playoffs regardless. It was just a matter of if they were going to be the 3 or 4 seed. And I don't think it really mattered to them. I think being healthy and being 100% heading into next weekend was the priority rather than winning this game. But they still came out really, really flat on offense. And you would hope that they would have shown more signs of life on offense heading into the playoffs, because that has been the big knock on them all year. They've only eclipsed 50 points a handful of times, and 2 of those times were against San Antonio. So take it with a grain of salt, right? But um, you got to be worried if you're a Pirates fan the way this offense has looked going into the playoffs. You play Frisco on the road in the opening weekend. So yeah, it's a tough spot for the Pirates, especially how they've been playing. But in this game in particular, Alejandro Benefield got the start, but was eventually pulled out of I'm imagining precaution just to make sure he was healthy for the playoffs. Jimmy Robinson was heavily involved in the passing game. He hauled in 9 catches for 64 yards, but there wasn't much else for Mass to really hang their hat on in this one. There wasn't much on offense that you could point to and be like, wow, they did this really well. I think they were just going through the motions, like, hey, let's get out of here, get back to Massachusetts, practice for the week, and then fly back out to Frisco for next week. So they're traveling to Texas next weekend or this weekend to face the Frisco Fighters in the first round of the playoffs. And it's going to be an interesting matchup that we'll preview a little bit later. But for Tulsa, this was a strong finish to the season, but they have to be kicking themselves for how they seem to self sabotage themselves this season. Everything that needed to happen in order to make the playoffs towards the end of the season, it fell the way that they needed to. They won a couple games that they won the last game of the season. If they beat Quad City the week before this one in week 18, they're in the playoffs right now. And if they find a way to score more than 22 points against Massachusetts early in the year, they're potentially in the playoffs right now. If their offense shows any sign of life during their 6-week losing streak that they had earlier, they're probably in the playoffs right now. So this season, it's it's still a success, all things considered, because their inaugural season last year they had 3 wins, and they doubled it to 6 wins this year. So it's still a success, still a step in the right direction, but it's got to be so frustrating to know that they were so close to making the dance and potentially advancing and making some noise, because at this point it's a new season for the folks that are in the playoffs. In terms of this game, Andre Sale, he had a tremendous day at quarterback. He went 20 for 31 for 191 yards and 6 touchdowns, while getting the ball to the IFL leader in receptions, Alexis Rosario, 7 times for 88 yards and a touchdown, and running back Jared Ware caught it 9 times for 76 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, like I said, 2024, it's still a success for the Oilers, all things considered, but I think it's a good thing for Oilers fans that they're like, man, we could have done more. Like I'd rather be in that situation than some of the situations that other teams are in where they had a fall from grace like they've never seen before. So Tulsa's still trending upwards. If they're able to retain some of the core pieces that they have on both sides of the ball, they should be pretty competitive in 2025. But the way the roster turnover works in the IFL, would not be surprised to see some of the players come back. Some of the players get poached to other teams. They have a handful of guys that could get looks in the CFL or the UFL. So it's really up in the air how things look in 2025 for Tulsa, but it's not all bad for the Oilers. I still feel like this was a good season for them and a step in the right direction. Next game we're going to talk about is the Arizona Rattlers at the San Antonio Gunslingers, and Arizona won this game 41-34. So Arizona was in a win and you're in situation in this one. All they had to do was beat the Gunslingers, and they were in the playoffs. They were in full control of their destiny, and they were in full control of this game for the majority of the game. They eventually cruised to the win in the second half, but this was a pretty back and forth affair in the first half that kind of got leveled in Arizona's favor by the rushing attack. The rushing attack between Shannon Brooks and Dalton Sneed was the start of the game. Shannon Brooks had 3 touchdowns on the ground. Dalton Sneed added 2 more, and they punched their ticket to the playoffs in this one. This game going into it had a point total of 104.5. So that means heading into this one, the odds makers thought both of these teams are probably going to score in the 50s. One of them might score in the 60s. It's going to be a bang, 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 bang pinball type of game where you're just looking back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And truthfully, I thought it would be too. Sam Casanova and the San Antonio offense is number 1 offense in the league. The Arizona offense has shown the ability to keep up in shootouts and outscore opponents like that. But both teams had a couple of turnovers in the first half that really derailed momentum for either offense. And the defense has kind of stepped up in a way that I don't think very many people were expecting, especially the San Antonio defense. So I don't know what it was. They were feeling very inspired in their last game of the season and in their last home game and last regular season game of the year. But this was a much more defensive battle than I think anybody anticipated. And Arizona, like I said, punched their ticket to the playoffs, and they're in. For the Gunslingers, last week I mentioned that Sam Casanova was 6 touchdowns away total from hitting 100 on the year. That means passing touchdowns and rushing touchdowns combined. He's sitting at 94. And I thought he had a strong chance of getting those 6 touchdowns and hitting that 100 mark, which would be incredible, quite the feat. But he really couldn't get much going on early on in the passing game here. He ended the day going 11 for 26 for 144 yards and 3 touchdowns and an interception. So a completion percentage that pretty uncharacteristic of him and that offense. And he added another touchdown on the ground, which brought his season total to 98. So he was so close to hitting that 100 mark. But the fact that we're saying like, oh dang, he could have hit 100. That's 98 touchdowns. That is so many touchdowns. So big props to Sam Casanova for the amazing season that he had all throughout the year. Wide receiver Naquan Murray, he continued his strong finish to the season with 5 catches for 56 yards and 2 touchdowns. And wide receiver DJ Myers also got 59 yards and a touchdown as well. So the San Antonio offense had a historic first season in the IFL with teams that are new to the league that come from other leagues. They typically have an adjustment period. Look at one of the other teams, Jacksonville. They had a very rough time transitioning from NAL rules to the IFL rules. But this San Antonio team, they hit the ground running and they were looking incredible all throughout the season. They had a few speed bumps along the way, but the fact that Sam Casanova had 98 touchdowns speaks volumes to what this offense can do. And after the game this past weekend, they announced that the offensive coordinator and head coach are coming back with a change at defensive coordinator because the defense, as good as the offense was, the defense was equally as bad. The defense was the worst defense in the league, giving up the most points every single game on average. So if they can get a middle of the pack defense next year with something that even resembles this high-powered offense in 2025, they are going to be a force and probably a playoff team in the West. But season comes to an end for San Antonio. Arizona advances, and lots of good things going on in San Antonio. Next game we're going to talk about is the Quad City Steamwheelers at the Jacksonville Sharks, and Jacksonville won this game in thrilling fashion, 43-37. So Jacksonville, they stunk for the majority of this season. Let's just call it for what it is. They were not good for the first 10, 11, 12 games of the year, but I'll be damned. they were electric towards the end of the year. They finished the last quarter of the season with a 3-1 record, and that one loss came to the number one seed in the East in the Green Bay Blizzard, and that was only by 3 points. So Jacksonville finished this season very strong with a lot of momentum heading into 2025. It was a night and day difference between the Sharks team that we saw in weeks 1 through 5, 1 through 6, versus the team that we've seen over the past 4 or 5 weeks to end the season. And the main reason for that is due to the quarterback play of Caleb Barker. He really injected some life into this offense and this organization, and got the fan base fired up for next season. And if you want to talk about an electric ending to a season, let alone an electric ending to a game, look no further than this game in particular. Quad City was going for a game-winning field goal with, I think, 4 or 5 seconds left. They kick it. It goes wide, a little bit short. It's a kick six. Tyler King catches it, runs it all the way back for a touchdown with no time left. The Jacksonville arena went bonkers. They were going nuts in there. And it was really the exclamation point on a tough season that Jacksonville really needed to feel good about where they're at as an organization, and really getting used to the way the IFL works, and getting themselves in a good spot for 2025. But it was a tremendous ending to the game. As it was happening, my jaw dropped. I was like, I can't believe we're watching a basically an identical play to the old Auburn, Alabama Iron Bowl kick six from what was that, 2013, all those years ago. It just incredible ending to that game. And it was their first win over a playoff bound team as well. Quad City is going to be in the playoffs starting next week, but it gives, again, lots of reasons to be optimistic about year 2 in the IFL next season. And on the other side, the road woes continued for Quad City. When the Steamwheelers are at home, they average 45.8 points a game on offense, and then 44.3 points per game on defense. So they average more points on offense than they give up on defense. That's good. That's typically what you want in a football game. But when they're on the road, it's a very different story. On offense, they're only averaging 39.1 points per game. Down defense, they're averaging 47.5 given up. So they're getting outscored by 8 points a game on average on the road. And so that's problematic, because Quad City's locked into the 4 seed. What does that mean for the playoffs? That means every game that they play is going to be a road game. Now, have they beat Green Bay this season? Yes. Have they beat Massachusetts this season? Yes. Have they beat Frisco this season? Yes. They beat all 3 of the other playoff teams in the East. But what do all 3 of those games have in common? They were all at home. Quad City on the road is a very different team. So they've proven that they can compete with the top teams in the East when they're at home. But when they're on the road, it's a very different story. So they have a tough road ahead of them. By no means am I counting them out, but it's going to be very tough for them to face Green Bay in the first round of the playoffs, who has been an absolute wagon over the last half of the season here. And it's going to be a tough sled in the head. But Quad City, they almost had a chance to do a walk-off field goal on the road, get some positive momentum into the playoffs, but they came just a little bit short. So we'll dive into that preview with Green Bay a little bit later. Speaking of Green Bay, the next game we're going to talk about is the Green Bay Blizzard at the Sioux Falls Storm, and Green Bay won this game in convincing fashion, 51-30. And honestly, folks, it was not even that close. Heading into this one, Green Bay needed to win this game in order to secure home field advantage all throughout the playoffs and that number 1 seed, and they came out and they dominated. They got out to a 30-7 lead at one point, and the defense was just playing suffocating football all throughout the first half and all throughout the game, and they just continued to keep their foot on the gas and absolutely crush the Storm. Quarterback Max Mailer, he continued his IFL MVP campaign here with an unreal game. He went 23 for 28 for 265 yards and 5 touchdowns, with 2 more touchdowns on the ground, so 7 total in the game. And not the first time he's done that this season. So he has put up, I'd say quietly, putting up a season where you can make the case for him to be the IFL MVP, given how Green Bay has performed this year and what he's brought to the table, both through the passing game and on the ground as well. EJ Burgess had a huge game through the air. He hauled in 9 catches for 123 yards and 2 touchdowns, and DB Riverius Rivers added another interception to his total on the year. And again, this Green Bay defense was suffocating, and The Storm offense just could not get much going, and this Green Bay team is looking primed for a playoff run. If this defense can continue to play the way that they have, defense wins championships at any level of football, regardless of if it's indoor arena, anywhere. So this defense has the ability to carry them to a championship. And if Max Mailer can do his thing like he did in this one, scoring 7 touchdowns, paired with that defense, they're going to be a very tough out for anybody in the league. So Green Bay is looking really good. And again, like I said, they're paired up with Quad City in Green Bay this upcoming weekend, which we'll preview a little bit later. And on the other side, Sioux Falls fans can finally breathe a sigh of relief. It's over. The nightmare's done. The worst season in Sioux Falls history can't hurt you anymore. They can't go out and lose another game. They're maxed out. They're done. This was the toughest test of the season by far for quarterback Jaya Wright. And he did okay, all things considered, going up against the number one defense in all the IFL, but he just really couldn't get things going until it was way too late, until the game was very much in hand for Green Bay. He finished 7 for 15 for 72 passing yards and 2 touchdowns and an interception, but he added another 90 yards on the ground, which was pretty impressive. But then it took 20 rushing attempts to get to that point. So a lot of it was him running for his life and scrambling and trying to turn nothing into something. He did the best he could. Let's just say that he did the best he could against this Green Bay defense. But wide receiver Drayshawn Hudson, he hauled in 4 catches for 55 yards, and he caught both of the touchdowns from Jaya Wright. To end the year pretty strong, but there really wasn't much else going for the Storm. This might be the last time we see Lorenzo Brown Jr. again for the Storm, and it might be the end of an era again for the Storm. So they have some tough decisions to make in the offseason, coming off of however many winning seasons in a row that they had, making an appearance in the national championship last season, and going from that to this 3-13 season. It was not what anybody had in mind, I'm sure, in that org, but there's nowhere to go but up. Right. Well, I guess I could go like 2-14 or 1-15, but that's not going to happen. We're not going to speak negativity. We're not going to do that. Nowhere to go but up, Sioux Falls fans. Yeah, we'll see what they do. But being that Sioux Falls is Sioux Falls, there's a reason to be optimistic going forward. But we're going to have to see how they handle things in the offseason. Next game we're going to talk about is the Iowa Barnstormers at the Frisco Fighters, and Frisco won this game 59-47. So Frisco got off to a slow-ish start in this one, but they were ultimately able to pull ahead and do the Frisco thing and outlast the Barnstormers in this one. Iowa jumped out to a quick 14-5 lead early on, and it was odd to see Frisco in a hole that early, because they're usually the ones putting people in a hole and leaning on that run game to really put a hurting on people. But TJ Edwards had another great game to end the year. He went 11 for 17 for 147 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, with 54 rushing yards and 4 more touchdowns on the ground. So another 7-touchdown game on this Saturday slate of football. And Faison McClurge at wide receiver, he had a monster week, 6 catches for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he's heating up just in time for the playoffs. Was it the game before where he had 5 touchdown catches? He had 2 in this one, and those 2 that he caught were long grabs that really stretched the defense out for Frisco and enabled some running lanes for TJ and company to make some plays in on the ground. But Ethan Castle, DB for Frisco, he ended up snagging 2 interceptions for this defense and really flipped the momentum of the game and put Frisco in the driver's seat to end this one for their 13th win of the season. So they finished the season 13-3, but they lose the tiebreaker to Green Bay. So they're in the 2 seed and will be hosting the Massachusetts Pirates next weekend in the first round of the playoffs. And they're in a really good spot for the playoffs, but they would be in a better spot if they still had Justin Rankin, former guest on the show, friend of the program. But he just got signed with the Edmonton Elks of the CFL. So he made the trip up to Edmonton. He's not going to be with the team for the rest of the IFL season. And the Fighters offense is still stacked, assuming they can get some of the players that have been a little banged up over the last part of the season here back off of the short-term IR in time for the playoffs, which I'm sure they will. They were resting some of those key pieces in that Week 19 game, but if they can come back full strength, they have just as good a shot at anybody in the entire league to walk away as the champions of the league if they can do what they do on a consistent basis and take care of business in the first round and make it to the Eastern Conference Championship, which has been the big hurdle for them to get over the past couple of seasons. But for Iowa, they went out fighting. This season did not go Iowa's way. They had 4 or 5 quarterbacks in play for the team, and that's just entirely too many. But as has been the case for Iowa games so far this year, they looked good. They were able to get some big plays, but turnovers really killed them in this one. Quarterback Brandon Alt, he went 16 for 28, excuse me, for 264 yards and 6 touchdowns. Great numbers through the air. But he also had 2 crucial interceptions. So indoor and arena football is a game of getting stops. And when you throw 2 interceptions, but then your defense isn't able to get anything, that's not great. That's not good. The good news is that Alt found 4 different receivers for touchdowns in the game. Keyshawn Taylor caught a touchdown. Quan Williams had 3 touchdowns in this one. So he was able to spread the ball out, and they might have somebody they can lean on. They had another quarterback from earlier in the year that they were going to have to make some decisions on. Kyle King, he looked pretty good when he was playing. So some interesting decisions for Iowa in terms of the players, in terms of the roster, in terms of the coaching staff. If we're just being honest. The bad news is that Iowa had no presence on the ground yet again. They only had 5 carries for 23 yards on the day. And all year, the Barnstormers have been able to get big chunk plays through the air, but they haven't been able to find that balance that's really needed specifically in the IFL. In the AFL, you can pass, and it's fine. But in the IFL, you have to have some sort of action in the running game to be successful. You have your outliers here and there, but for Iowa specifically, they don't have the quarterback that can take over a game with solely his arm. They need to find some balance and help their quarterbacks out. So in 2025, if I was able to focus on improving that balance and having some life in the running game consistently, game to game, they should be much more competitive. But last year they had Antonio Wimbush, who made his way out to Vegas, left the Barnstormers. The hole that he left was pretty apparent, and they found some spurts of guys to fill in, but they didn't find a true answer for the majority of the season. So I think that's going to be something that they have to evaluate moving forward. But Iowa showed that they can compete with some of the top teams in the league. They just need to do so consistently and have a little bit of injury luck on their side next year. The next game we're going to talk about is the Bay Area Panthers at the San Diego Strikeforce, and Bay Area won this rendition of the Cali Clash 30-20. So very low scoring game. Cali Clashes have been low scoring in the past. It's not a surprise, but this was one of the more uneventful Cali Clashes we've seen. This was the 4th time these teams have played each other, and both teams are already in the playoffs. Bay Area already locked up the #1 seed. So both teams didn't play their starting quarterback. They were resting a few key pieces to make sure that they were as healthy as possible heading into the playoffs. And it just seemed like both teams were kind of going through the motions, looking to get out as unscathed as possible and as healthy as possible for the playoffs to hopefully make a run. Bay Area, of course, looking to repeat as champions, and San Diego making the playoffs for the first time in franchise history, hoping to make some noise and capture a national championship as well. So as uneventful as this Cali Clash was, they get a chance to redeem themselves next week. These 2 teams will play each other yet again, this time in Bay Area in San Jose. So we're gonna get the full firepower from both teams. We're gonna get the starting quarterbacks, starting running backs, starting wide receivers. Everybody's gonna be in. Starting DBs. Everybody's gonna be in, and I have a feeling it's gonna be the best Cali Clash to date because it's the one that matters the most. If you lose, you go home. If you win, you're on to the conference championship. So the stakes couldn't be higher. But for this game in particular, Bay Area started Felix Harper at quarterback in this one, and he had a pretty solid game. He went 11 for 15 for 84 yards, a touchdown and interception, but he had a few passes that probably could have ended up being intercepted as well. So he potentially could have had multiple interceptions in this one. It was a pretty sloppy game. Jazrick Peterson, for wide receiver for Bay Area, he had a phenomenal over-the-wall catch where he jumped over the wall and caught it and landed in the lap of somebody in the front row, and it was a really nice catch. And but like I said, this was very much a run the clock out, get to next week type of game for both teams. And wasn't super exciting to watch, but you get it when you think about the implications of it. And on the other side, this for San Diego, this was the Rudy Johnson read option show early on in this one. We saw it earlier in the year when Nate Davis was a little banged up. They really ran the ball with Rudy Johnson and Isaiah Cox, but eventually they worked in the newly signed Darius James Peterson, who spent some time with Iowa a little bit earlier this year. He got some reps on offense, but unfortunately didn't really do well passing the ball. 4 for 13, 79 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. But he was able to shine a little bit on the ground. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, which is where he has exceeded in the past. A few years ago, I believe he led the league in rushing as a quarterback. So he is a threat on the ground if you give him that opportunity. But this was a very forgettable game for the Strike Force offense, and I don't think they seemed to mind. It seemed like they were holding back. They didn't want to reveal their hand too much since there was a chance that they were going to play each other again next week based on how some of these games turned out. Again, next week we get Cali Clash Part 5. This is going to be the most important Cali Clash of the season, and I'm super excited for it. Next game we're going to talk about is the Tucson Sugar Skulls at the Vegas Nighthawks, and Vegas won this game 49-25. So Vegas needed a win and a San Diego loss to jump up to that number 2 seed and get a home playoff game. So Vegas was already in the playoffs, first time in franchise history. They were hoping to get a home playoff game, and they did because they won this game. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but Jerome Johnson had himself a day. Passing the ball, he went 10 for 14 for 180 yards and 5 touchdowns. Rushing, he had 13 rushes for 54 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Another 7-touchdown game for an MVP candidate. I feel like I'm repeating myself with some of these games here. We've got multiple MVP candidates in the last week of the season having 7-touchdown games. But wide receiver Quentin Randolph, he had himself quite a day as well. He hauled in 3 catches for 84 yards and 2 touchdowns, including a wild Hail Mary at the end of the first half that really flipped the momentum in Vegas's favor. Tucson was chipping away at the lead that Vegas had in the second quarter, but Vegas was able to yank that momentum back thanks to this crazy Hail Mary catch. It was an absolute dart thrown by Jerome Johnson, and Quentin Randolph just went up and got it with no time left, and was the boost that Vegas needed to really keep their foot on the gas and pull away in the second half. So Vegas makes the playoffs for the first time in franchise history, and they'll be hosting the Arizona Rattlers on Saturday night. And on the other side, Tucson had a really strong first half, and Vegas jumped out to a big lead early, but Tucson stayed with it in the first half. And they kept it close thanks to the rushing performance by Devontae Sapp Lynch, the veteran running back who's been in the league for a couple years now. But as has been the case with this Tucson offense over the past couple of weeks and through the majority of the season, if we're just being honest, they really struggled to pass the ball. And it's great if you can run the ball, but you need to have that balance of passing the ball just as well, if not better. Quarterback Vincent Espinoza, he ended the day going 10 for 21 for 87 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. And he realistically could only connect with Sapp Lynch through the air. So there wasn't a whole lot he could do. And this was just a nightmare season for Tucson. They finished with a 2-14 record. They went through 8 different starting quarterbacks throughout the season. Coach Billy Back seemed very optimistic about what this team's core could do in 2025 if they were able to bring back some pieces and build on some of this momentum. We gotta see if he gets that shot, because coming in and replacing Curtis Chin, who was coach of the year a few years back, and then going 2-14, that's a tough look. So we'll see if he gets another shot at it. But yeah, this Tucson team, it was definitely a season to forget, and one that started with a lot of promise and just went downhill very quickly. Then the last game of the IFL regular season was the Northern Arizona Wranglers at the Duke City Gladiators, and Duke City won this game 69-48. So this was a tough spot for the Northern Arizona Wranglers. They had a shot to make the playoffs heading into the weekend, but they needed Arizona Rattlers to lose, and they needed to win this game. The problem is Northern Arizona played on Sunday. Arizona played on Saturday. So Arizona won their game on Saturday, which clinched it for them and eliminated Northern Arizona from playoff contention. So heading into the weekend, there was some excitement, but heading into Sunday, the wind was out of their sails. This was the last game of the year. They really had nothing to play for. This was it. And it was pretty apparent that the Wranglers weren't playing their usual brand of football early on, and They eventually gave the keys to the offense to their backup quarterback, Dylan Sterling Cole, to get him some playing time and then see what he's got, see what he can do. Joshua Jones all but locked up the IFL Offensive Rookie of the Year award with his performance this season at quarterback. So might as well give Sterling Cole a shot. And he looked rough at the beginning, but eventually found his groove. He ended up going 16 for 28 for 244 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, but he had 2 interceptions as well. As has been the case with Northern Arizona all season, they couldn't get much going on the ground outside of the quarterback yet again. All the players who got touches who were not quarterbacks had a combined 3 carries for -5 yards. In 2025, if the Wranglers are able to bring back Joshua Jones and get a true running back to build this offense around and accompany Joshua Jones, I feel like this team can be very dangerous in the West yet again. They were already dangerous this year, and if they could provide a little bit of that balance, I think they'll be even more dangerous and they'll be able to secure a playoff spot. The absence of Jared Ware from this 2023 version of the Wranglers was very apparent at times throughout the season, and that it needs to be addressed to take that next step as a team and to really provide a little bit of balance because Joshua Jones can only do so much through the air and on the ground. We got to get him some help. Be able to get him a running back who can run up the middle, who can take it outside. Somebody like a PJ Vander, somebody that's a true running back to accompany him in the backfield. That would really take this Wranglers team to the next level. And for Duke City, this was not the season that they expected. They had a coaching change about a month back, and they were so close. I said it a few times that they were the best worst team in IFL history because they were super competitive, but they just couldn't piece it all together. And it seemed like the floodgates opened in this one, and they could do no wrong. They kept fighting, they kept chugging along, and in this last week of the season, they scored a season high in points with 69 points. Nice. Javin Kilgo had a strong day. 14 for 24, 151 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an interception, with 3 of those touchdowns going to Tamarian Terry, who really emerged as that much needed, big bodied wide receiver 1 for Duke City and somebody that they can really build around going forward if they can find a way to retain him and keep him for next year. He was acquired about halfway through the season from Jacksonville, and over time, he became more and more and more involved in this offense, and he became someone that they can truly build around moving forward. And Duke City was also able to apply constant pressure to Northern Arizona in this one, primarily due to Ernesto Lacayo. So the GOAT, Ernesto Lacayo, he's won Special Teams Player of the Week 3 times, I think, this season. He's probably going to win it a 4th time due to his performance this past week. He scored 25 total points through kicking in this one. 6 deuces, which has got to be the record for a game, 7 extra points, and 2 field goals for a total of 25 points. Just unbelievable performance from Lacayo. And it seemed like every time Duke City scored, they'd put 7 on the board and a deuce. 7 on the board and a deuce. So instead of getting 7 points at a time, they were getting 9 points at a time and just really laying it on Northern Arizona. So for every 3 times that they scored those 9-point combos, that forced Northern Arizona to have to score 4 times just to keep up. So great game by Lacayo and really showed the type of weapon that he could be. And he was one of the few bright spots for this Duke City team all throughout the season, and he really got a chance to shine in Week 19. Again, certainly not the most ideal season for Duke City, but it seems like the coaching change that they made about a month and a half ago and bringing in new head coach Kerry Lachlan was a step in the right direction. And you could tell that even in some of the play design that they were running, in this one, there were a few plays that caught my eye. I was like, ooh, that's nice. All right, I see the vision. I get what they're going for here. So we'll have to see if Duke City brings him back or if they decide to inject some new blood from the beginning. But I think if they give Lachlan a full run next year as head coach, we'll see a much better Duke City team in 2025. And how exciting would that be to see this Duke City team go from 3-13 to potentially making a playoff run if they can make some tweaks and win some of those coin flip games that they lost early on in the season. So I'm a fan of this Duke City team, even though they did finish 3-13. But this team was capable of achieving a lot more, and I think they'll surprise some people if they can keep select pieces from this offense and defense in 2025. So that was IFL Week 19, a great week of football, all things considered. The final time we saw 8 of those teams play in 2024, but that means we've got the playoffs starting next week. So let's dive into the playoff preview of some of the games taking place next weekend. And the first game we're going to look at is the Quad City Steamwheelers at the Green Bay Blizzard on Friday night. Now, Green Bay is going to be a massive favorite in this one, and as they should. They're 13-3. Max Mailer is playing at an unbelievable level at quarterback. This defense has been unreal all season. I think Quad City can keep this a little bit closer than some people may expect if they can run the ball with their running back, PJ Vander. If they're able to get him the ball at least 15 times on the ground, they have a chance to control the tempo of this game and have a chance to not put themselves in a situation where they have to pass all throughout the second half to catch up, because that's a recipe for disaster when you're passing against this secondary that is able to get a lot of turnovers and against that defensive line that is able to apply a ton of pressure on the quarterback. So if Quad City can effectively run the ball and have some long drives on offense that end in points and keep that Green Bay offense off the field, I think they have a better shot at keeping this game close. I don't want to say they'll pull off the upset just because Green Bay is so good, but I think this game is going to be a lot closer than people may expect. I think Green Bay heading into this one, the expectation is that they're just going to boat race Quad City, and that there's a chance that may happen. Let's just be real. There's a chance that may happen, but I feel like Quad City can keep it close. On defense, they have some really good playmakers. I love what Bubba Arslanian has brought to that middle of the field, and our guy Malik Duncan finds ways to make big plays in games like this. So I think Quad City can keep it close and keep it interesting, but I do think Green Bay ends up winning this game and advancing to the Eastern Conference Championship, which they will be hosting if they can win this game. So I'd expect Green Bay to win, probably looking at like a 43-35 type of game, somewhere in that range. Like I think it's going to be lower scoring on that end, just because of the level that Green Bay's defense has played at all throughout the year. I would expect Green Bay to probably be like a 10.5 point favorite heading into this one. So I might lean Quad City plus the points, but we'll see what the lines end up looking like. But I expect Green Bay to ultimately win this one and advance. Second game of the weekend is also in the Eastern Conference. It takes place on Saturday evening. It's going to be the Massachusetts Pirates at the Frisco Fighters. And Massachusetts, they limped into the playoffs here. They started off pretty strong, but they had a rough stretch where I think that they started 4-0, and I think they ended up going like 2-6 over their next game. And the offense is just not all clicking. I think they have the talent to beat any team in the East. I think they have the ability to keep this one close and to keep up with Frisco to a certain point, but they haven't demonstrated that ability consistently all throughout the year. This game against Frisco earlier in the season, it was a shootout. They kept it close. Frisco ultimately walked away with the win, but Massachusetts has all the talent in the world. Jimmy Robinson is an all IFL running back. He is unbelievable with the ball in his hand on kick returns, catching the ball out of the backfield, lining up at wide receiver, running the ball. He can do it all. So if they can really feed him the ball consistently and build around him and really try to stretch the field with Thomas Owens and Isaac Zico, assuming everyone's healthy and good to go, they have a good chance to knock off Frisco in this one. But they just, I'm not buying into the consistency that their offense should be bringing to the table, just because they haven't shown it consistently all throughout this season. So I think it's going to take at least 50 points to beat this Frisco team, and I'm not sure if Massachusetts can do that again. I just don't think so. And for Frisco, they're getting some pieces back off the short-term IR for this upcoming game, and I fully expect Frisco to walk away with the win here. They just seem to be clicking at the right time. TJ Edwards is heating up. Wide receivers, Faison McClurch has been playing unbelievable over the past couple of weeks. Ground game is always a threat with this Frisco Fighters team, and if they can get Martez Carter back next week and have Jimmy Smith in the mix as well, they won't have Justin Rankin, as I alluded to earlier in the pod, but I still think this Frisco team is very dangerous as long as they have TJ Edwards at quarterback there, the reigning MVP and potentially the MVP of this season as well. So I expect Frisco to win this game, probably looking at like a 52-45, 52-42, something in that range. Because I think Massachusetts can put points up quickly, but that consistency that I talked about is going to be a problem. And I think TJ Edwards has a very big game against this Pirates defense, and I feel like LJ McConnell, friend of the program, probably going to have he's due for an interception. He hasn't had a big time game changing interception in a little bit, and he had a ton of them early on. So I would expect to see him get in the mix in the return game and on defense. He'll probably get an interception. I hope he hears this, and I hope he makes me look good. LJ, do your thing. Let's do it. But yeah, I expect the Eastern Conference Championship to be a matchup of Frisco and Green Bay, a rematch of that mid-season game where Green Bay absolutely rolled over Frisco. So we'll see how it works out. But I expect Green Bay to win that first game on Friday, Frisco to win the second game on Saturday. Second game of the doubleheader on Saturday is going to be the first game of the Western semifinals. So it's going to be the Arizona Rattlers at the Vegas Nighthawks. Jerome Johnson has been playing unbelievable at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year for the Nighthawks. Middle of the year was a little dusty, a little cloudy. Wasn't sure what was happening there, but he's heating up just in time for the end of the year and going into the playoffs for the very first time in Vegas Nighthawks history. All that being said, this Arizona Rattlers team is very dangerous for the playoffs specifically. With the quarterback and running back duo that they have of Dalton Snead and Shannon Brooks, I feel like this offense is built to take out a team like Vegas and really focus on running the ball and keeping the ball out of Jerome Johnson's hands. So I think Vegas has a really strong chance to win this game in a shootout, but I think Arizona ultimately pulls this one off. And it's going to be in part to the running game that Shannon Brooks is able to provide. And Dalton Snead won the national championship with Bay Area last year by limiting mistakes through the air and being a contributor on the ground game as well. So I think he can do that again this year. And I'd expect Arizona to pull off the upset against Vegas in this one and make their way to the conference championship. And for Arizona's sake, maybe make it to the IFL National Championship for the first time in a long time. They over the past few years, they've gotten a reputation amongst IFL diehards of choking in the playoffs. I think this year they can overcome this Vegas team and get to the conference championship. And the final game of the weekend is going to be the Cali Clash, the off the wall's favorite rivalry in all of the IFL. It's going to be the San Diego Strikeforce at the Bay Area Panthers on Sunday evening. So we got a game on Friday night, got a doubleheader on Saturday night, and then a game on Sunday night. So we got games all throughout the weekend. So in this one, it's hard for me to pick against Bay Area. I feel like Bay Area is built to specifically take out the rest of these teams in the Western Conference. They run the ball really well with their running back and quarterback. They play tremendous defense, especially in the secondary, and they're able to knock people out of their rhythm. And that rhythm is very important for the San Diego offense to get into early so that they can avoid falling into holes like they have all throughout this season in those close losses that they had. In the games that they've lost, specifically to Bay Area, San Diego has come out slow and has had trouble getting things going, but then they're able to turn it up in the second half and either take the lead late or threaten to take the lead late and really make a game out of it. Quarterback Nate Davis, he didn't play last week, and San Diego had a bye week the week before, so Nate Davis hasn't played in 2 weeks. So I feel like San Diego's going to start a little bit slower than they would like. And I feel like Bay Area is gonna maintain some of that momentum and really get the ground game going early with Shane Simpson and Daquan Neal. So I'd expect a very competitive game still. I feel like this is going to be one of the more exciting games of the weekend in terms of like we've seen the first 3 Cali Clashes. They were unbelievable, very entertaining games, and I don't think this one's going to be any different, but I would expect Bay Area to ultimately win this one, and we'll see a potential matchup of Arizona Rattlers at the Bay Area Panthers in the Western Conference Championship, which would be a little Dalton Snead revenge game Dalton was the quarterback for Bay Area last year, currently the quarterback for the Rattlers. So interesting little storyline if these games work out the way I think they will. But yeah, Bay Area is just built to make a run in the playoffs like this, and I think that they get started with a win against San Diego. So we've got a super exciting weekend of games up ahead to kick off the IFL playoffs. Going to be a very fun slate all throughout the weekend. So luckily we don't have any games conflicting with each other. We'll be able to watch each game independently, which will be nice, but some very entertaining football ahead. And hopefully we'll see a few upsets. Hopefully we'll see some teams make it to the IFL National Championship that haven't been there before, but we've got some teams that are looking like they're returning to their form from past seasons. So we'll see what happens. And that's the show. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. Again, give us a follow on all the socials if you haven't already, at Off the Wall FB, F as in foot, B as in ball. Off the Wall FB on Instagram, X/Twitter, TikTok, all that stuff. And then if you're watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share this with a friend, troll me in the comments, do all that fun stuff. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, rate the podcast, like the episode, do all that fun stuff on there as well. So only 24 hours in a day. The fact that you chose to spend an hour 14, 15 with me today talking listen to me blabber on about arena and indoor football means a lot, and I appreciate you taking the time. So enjoy this upcoming weekend of the IFL playoffs. Follow us along on socials. I'll be tweeting about the games all throughout the weekend, and would love to have you be a part of the conversation. So take care. Have a great rest of your week. I'll see you next time. Bye.